Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is the second of our talks this semester, seventh, I think, in total. Faculty of Art and Design, Kadir Has University, Art, Design, and Architecture talk series. So we're having two special guests today. And I'd like to again welcome you to this conversational dialogue, as I put it. So we're going to spend about an hour together talking, discussing the issues I'll outline in a minute, and then we'll have a Q&A session. For the Q&A session, you're welcome to type on chat, or if you want to ask you questions in person, we'll let you do it in the end of the talk as well. Unfortunately, as I was mentioning before the recording started, we're not able to broadcast live on YouTube today. So it is going to be available, the talk, I mean, on YouTube following the Zoom recording and live conversation. So if you know anybody who are there, more YouTube people than Zoom kind of people, you can invite them over here. Thank you very much. So let me first introduce the themes and structure of the talk, and I'll be consulting my notes once in a while here. So please, I hope you don't mind me doing that. So we are here mainly to discuss the role of design activism in the making of more equitable living environments, and ask together questions such as how can we increase the awareness in our students, design and architecture students, namely, toward their city and the world at large in the face of current urban, environmental, economic, and humanitarian crises. How can critical bottom-up architectural and design practices become a tool for community empowerment? And we'll do that while situating ourselves in Beirut in particular, and the Middle East and the Mediterranean in general. My guests who are with us today wear at least two different hats. They both teach in the Department of Architecture and Design at the American University of Beirut and have been involved in practice. And by involved, I don't simply mean that they have practice in parallel, but what I mean is that their teaching is also practice-oriented, meaning their courses and pedagogical approaches are informed by the realities of urban life, and they seek to address the pressing issues surrounding not only Beirut and Lebanon, but the Middle East and the region in general. Needless to say, many of these issues are global, while local factors also feed into them and influence the ways in which they are felt by the people. So we are going to focus on Beirut and Lebanon today through student projects from various studio years, as well as Rana's and Carla's critical practices. I'll specifically ask them how such critical and grounded practices inform and fuel their pedagogical experience and their current research interests. But first, me properly introduce them to you in a little bit more detail. Carla Aramouny is an architect and assistant professor at the American University of Beirut, Department of Architecture and Design, where she's currently the architecture program coordinator. She holds an MArch from the University of Pennsylvania and a BArch from Lebanese American University. Her research and teaching tackle intersections of architecture and the expanded environment with a focus on hybrid architecture, ecology, and infrastructure, and on digital analog shifts in making and representation. Her work has been presented and published in several international conferences and exhibitions, and she's also founder and director of ARD's Tech Lab, a digital fabrication unit at AUB. Rana Haddad, an AA Architectural Association graduate, acquired the title of an activist as she practiced architecture and design in the post-war city of Beirut. Starting in 1997, her research workshop was set up with her practice with the aim of questioning the ability of objects and places to become means of political expression. Soon after, these quests turned into public installation works, puncturing the city, grabbing people's attention locally and internationally. With her students and colleagues, Rana has produced several public installations and performances in Beirut and internationally. She's lectured and given hands-on workshops in many art and architectural institutions. She's currently an assistant professor also at the American University of Beirut. In 2013, she co-founded 200 Grams, a studio, and the studio's two founders are both drawn by Beirut's constraints and the many challenges facing those who live in this complex city. In response, 200 Grams work actively with local Lebanese artisans to promote their craftsmanship and keep their knowledge and skills alive, which are at the risk of disappearing today. Recently, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London acquired 2 pieces from their studio. So our conversation is going to be structured into 3 parts. One will be on education, and the other will be about practice. And we'll then talk about the ways in which these connect through research. And I'd like to, and whenever my guests want to illustrate their responses and answers, this is an ongoing conversation, so we talked before on these issues, briefly. They're welcome to share their screens and then, shape their own, illustrate their own conversation on response. So this first question goes to both of you. So when we think of critical practices in architecture and design, right, we also need to remember what we're up against, right? I mean, cities all over the world, including those in our region, have witnessed privatization of large chunks of public spaces. Unregulated housing markets left masses of people vulnerable, and informal settlements have expanded, not to mention the long-term crises and conflicts in our region. And the story we're told is that healthcare and education are not rights or basic needs, but they're services we need to pay for, right? So how can we address these issues as academics in architecture within the framework of a design school, right, to help progress toward more equitable societies? I know this is a big question, but I'd like to start the discussion here. Rana or Carla, whoever wants to make a start, please go ahead.
Go for it, Carla.
First, thank you very much, Kıvanç, and your school for hosting us today for this very exciting talk, actually. We're happy to be back in conversation together, even if virtually for today. So having said that, if you'd like, I mean, I can immediately share screen just so with my
Sure.
Screen.
Go ahead.
Okay, this might take some. Okay, sorry about that. I promise we'll be quicker next. So just maybe to comment on your point and your question, really, I do find it essential actually in academia today, especially in architecture that deals with the built environment at its very, to be aware of people in the city or even outside of the city, use the practice of architecture itself to address these issues wherever possible. So in teaching architecture, I find it extremely that students are actually equipped to understand such gaps from a local lens, but also how these gaps connect to the global discourse and the global issues at large. Very much so in the times that we are living today of extreme climate urgency, and even now as we're seeing.
We've been cut.
Yeah, maybe the presentation is making it a little bit more difficult to.
Yeah.
It's slowing down the connection, most probably it happens.
This is
She's back.
Yeah.
Carla, we weren't able to hear your very final minutes. Maybe the presentation is making it harder. I'm not sure. The last minutes we missed. You disconnected
Okay.
sort of.
Actually, I'm connected.
Maybe the presentation is slowing down. I'm not sure. So if you want to keep it down for a bit or not, it's up.
No. Actually,
you're lagging, Carla.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Now better, yeah.
We did, and then we lost you again, I think. I can also, Ezgi is suggesting that, in fact, I can share the presentation myself. I have it. Carla, should I do it? Maybe it's going to be better.
Any better now?
Yes. Let me share the presentation, and then you guide me through.
That might be easier. I had my best internet on, and it sort of threw me out, and I'm back to
that's part of the many crises you're having around. So no problem.
And we have a thunderstorm actually today, so we get
same in Istanbul, the snowstorm.
The additional internet cuts all the time.
For the additional fun, as if we needed more fun in our lives. Yeah.
Exactly, absolutely. So sorry, I know you missed possibly what I was saying, but I was trying to stress about, the importance of having students be aware of their practice and the fact that they can make a change by actually being able to observe these issues in the city, but also beyond the city, and to tailor their practice towards the greater good. I think this is essential today, and that they feel that they have the role to contribute to urgent issues that affect and implicate the built environment. So of course, examples of these issues include what you've stated, but I think we can also think about them as the health and safety of the urban environment, and not really to think about them purely in terms of policies, but also in terms of how design can contribute to bettering the health and safety, the right, of course, for housing, the access to public space and spaces of leisure, and of course, infrastructure, which should be at the core of the thinking, where architects do not limit themselves only to building or designing at the scale of the building alone, but allow their practice actually to extend. So by expanding their thinking to these questions, and by rethinking these issues at the larger scale of the built and natural environment, I believe this has to be at the core of the discipline today, and to really focus on the amelioration of the livelihood of the people, and really long-term sustainability for both, not only the built environment, but more importantly, the natural environment. So yeah, the slides that I had shared were just to show somehow that scale of, let's say, observation that I tried to bring, especially in design studios that I teach, to my students, and looking at subjects beyond just the scale of the city alone, but looking, for example, in these images at biosphere reserves and the potential for communities to engage with them. And the previous image actually was showing a relationship between the coastal developments and the relationship between water systems and subterranean water collection and water needs in that area.
Thank you very much. Rana, would you like to follow up on that question?
Yes. I will share screen 2 here. Basically, my take is always been about the bottom up, for the simplest reason is that after the Civil War, I chose to be always on the streets, believing that this is the best place to be informed from when it is related to city. And it has a human scale, and at the same time, that human scale is related to this urban scale that is our city and how we have to deal with it. And basically, why public installation? And this is the idea came so we can reconnect people to what the city is about. And through this practice, I've realized that it wasn't only valid for a city like Beirut, but it is valid in any city, because it becomes like a trigger for people, and at the same time, the trigger develops a certain narration. And this is very contextual because it is related to the moment where things are happening. So along this talk, we will see if we are in COVID time, how the virtual installation became directly related to what we've been living versus the extreme economic crisis, and so on and so forth. So the idea of wanting to be public brings people first into having a hands-on, being at a one-to-one scale, understanding the complexity of the city very, very quickly, and at the same time having to react and to build something. And to converse, because there is a certain exchange with the public that is happening. So somehow this brings the whole work into understanding the reality at hand and not having it just theoretically on paper. So it's really the extreme of rewriting moments within the city that are very contextual. And definitely, like Carla was saying, it is a sense of awareness, and it is a sense of giving to the students the right tools for them to know what kind of work they would like to implement later on in their own practice, or whenever they would choose to belong to a certain practice. I think
okay.
We can.
No, I think it's a great point, and I wanted to continue from there. In fact, focusing more on your teaching, Rana. I know that you taught basic design for one semester. I know that you were part of Vertical Studio and graduation thesis first semester, usually, if I'm not wrong.
Yes,
so
mainly.
I mean, obviously, one way to increase the awareness in our students of the reality of urban life, right, around themselves, like the diversity of the people in the city, the disadvantaged groups, the struggle over power that shape city spaces. One way is to assign them projects that immediately takes place in the urban, right, with the kind of critical content, obviously. And encourage them to interact with the people. This might be a little bit of a niche question, but because I teach basic design too. So what can you, can you talk about your experience in that, which begins right from the basic design studio. So how does the very first year studio relate to this? Because it's traditionally understood as like study of abstract geometric shapes and while having little connection to context elsewhere. So I'm very curious to hear about that.
Very, very, very true. And I do agree with you, Kıvanç, on this. So we have a duty towards our students. We have to give them all these abstract knowledge and geometries and form and shapes, and this is what we need to bring to them as basics for in their first year. But at the same time, along the years while I was teaching, I realized that there are things that are not stuck into a specific year, which is a mindset and the way of thinking. And I think that we owe it to our students from the first year. So this is why after doing all these exercises, I always try to find a way to bring them back to the city. But just as an anecdote, not even a month ago, I had a student after 10 years sending me a picture of him trying again to do the vertical tower, which is one of the exercises that we give in basic design. And how can you build the tallest tower with one A4? And he was testing himself out after 10 years. And of course, it's a very successful tower because he went from his table to the ceiling. So just to say again, these exercises are mindsets, they stay with the students. And I love it when they come back to say that this exercise helped me into discovering or realizing or resolving another project. So, and at the same time, the other thing that I understood is that the importance of the hands-on. So this is a project that we did in basic design with neighborhood initiative on the streets of Beirut in Hamra. So they had to be very responsible about how they can implement an object that is sustainable, that deals with recycling and understanding the ecology, because we wanted to put planters that uses the water of the air conditioning. So suddenly they had to understand how plants takes the water and how we cannot overwater them. So this container had to have to allow some water excess water to go out and to maintain the plant living. And we chose on purpose 6 projects and we implemented them in Hamra, and some of them are still in Hamra and are still working. So just to say, it doesn't have a year for that, because if the students are well informed, they can always come up and deal with the topic and end up learning in a much more complex way what the city is about through a very simple exercise. And another exercise that I would like to share very quickly is that during COVID time, because we couldn't really bring them to the city, we had to find a way for them to deal with their everyday life. And this is where the constraints would help you to become creative. And we asked them, to use all the tools that they have at home to come up with something that we call the sound walk. So they had to understand their body, understand the movement of their body, and understand the projection of a movement of a leg or of a hand or of a head, whatever. But what was important is that we were able to connect to them and to talk about the parking lot as much as we were able to connect to them and to talk about the rooftop and the city and their relationship to the city. So the project always finds a way to expand. And here, like you see, this girl was using all her mom's kitchen cutleries and forks and knives. And of course, the parents were hating our guts. But at the same time, the students learned so much. So there is always the two sides of the story. I hope I answered your question.
No, you definitely did. I think this is how we approach to the issue of hands-on. If we're giving them scaled models to work on, or just a one-to-one actual thing to work on. I think it makes a lot of difference. Yeah,
of course, but we do all. This is why I'm saying the geometry and the studies of this always happen, but always in hands-on. So we start with 2D drawings to move to models at hand to actually use the full body and then projection into the city.
Okay.
So
I get it. Thank you.
We try to always have the 4 steps in our studio. Yeah.
Okay, maybe then I'll move to Carla now. Thank you very much, Rana. This wonderful material, really. And since I teach basic design as well, very inspiring to me always. So when we think of such interventions, Carla, made to the city spaces, we need to remember obviously the diverse scale, and you already problems, and you've already mentioned them in the first answering the first question. I mean, from the scale of obviously an object, right, such as the public installation in the human scale, to the scale of infrastructure and the built environment or natural environments, especially with the growing concern about ecological and humanitarian crises around us, right? So can you please talk about your own experience with design studio and maybe elective courses as well, to reflect on the same question? How do your courses engage with different larger scales critically and raising awareness in students' understanding of them?
Absolutely, Kıvanç. I think I'll try again to share screen from my end.
I can do it myself as well if you want. Yes, for now.
You can see it now, right?
It is coming. So, it's a little bit slow. Yeah, it's here now.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I will try, and then we'll see if I...
Okay.
So yes, absolutely. I mean, the issue or the question of scale, I find it extremely important in teaching, and I particularly, I think, approach it through 2 main ends. One, through design studios, which typically deal with the move from the big scale, the really macro, to the scale of the architecture, and another in an elective that I teach, which focuses actually on a much more smaller scale, even though it is tailored to infrastructural thinking. So as I said, I really try to expand on the scale of architectural intervention. And I always like to move away from thinking about architecture only at the scale of a building, but really as a system that connects to a much larger continuum. And in design studios specifically, I am interested in looking at both the scales of the built environment, but also the scale of the natural environment. I'm always interested in sites that intersect the two. And usually in several design studios that I've given, we've tried to tackle many different environments across Lebanon, usually going towards uncharted areas, and sometimes ranging from urban sites or to ex-urban sites or peri-urban sites, all the way to rural areas. So we try to highlight key issues at the intersection of the built and the natural through different areas across Lebanon, and always dealing with it each year, of course, and each studio has a completely different theme, but there's always this concern from the macro scale to the smaller scale of the architectural intervention, and always this idea of hybridizing, let's say, intersecting architecture with other values or other systems. So what we're looking at here actually is an example from a studio that I co-taught a few years ago called Ecologies of Leisure with Nicolas Fayyad. The work of that studio was published and presented also at the Seoul Biennale in 2019. And in that studio, we focused on the area of Zouk Musbeh in north of Beirut, which is, we consider it as a desolate industrial landscape that includes, at the coastal area, it includes a lot of programs from, a main power plant that pollutes the area to different beach resorts that started, coming up since the 60s until almost the late 80s, in addition to a lot of residual agricultural field and leftover landscapes in between. So we were very much interested in that zone as a coastal prime zone that has main potential to become something else, to have a rejuvenated, let's say, ecology, to bring it back to a state where these different programs can synergize, but also to think about them in more of a renewable and sustainable future. So, and again, the students were, let's say, asked to look at it from the macro scale, to look at the scale of the entire coast, but also at the scale of the singular intervention in different areas. And they approached it really from different ends. Some students, like in this group, they looked at the marine ecology of the area and trying to restructure it through some wave barriers that are inserted in order to recreate that marine species and reduce pollution in the sea through biospheres and filtering landscape systems. Another group focused a lot on the issue of water, actually, and rethinking water collection as a network coming from the hills of the nearby surfaces, bringing them down into this coastal zone and rethinking it as almost a new delta condition, trying to evoke also supporting local ecology and trying to bring in this idea of agritourism with energy efficient, maybe through solar or other types of renewable energy sources for energy production to the area. So really it was about bringing these two ends together and a design that incorporate landscape, leisure parks, new ecological landscapes with architectural spaces and intervention for different programs. In another studio, and with a similar, let's say, this is also, from the same studio and the intersection between a remediated landscape and architectural interventions on an existing structure that is there. In another studio, more recent, also co-taught with Naila Al-Ael on the area of Shikka in Lebanon, which is actually, it's also a particular area in the north of the country that suffers a lot from cement production. So factories of cement have been there since the late 50s, the 60s mostly, and have completely reshaped the area, turning it mostly into an industrial zone, heavily polluted, and have affected a lot the livelihood of the neighborhoods that are there. So in that studio, we wanted to completely shift the focus of Shikka to move it away from cement production, imagining that, in a better state, Lebanon, cement production can be relocated to areas that actually make sense, and not prime coastal areas, not areas that have heavy urban and suburban density, and that you can come up with new economic models that favor the environment and favor actually the natural landscape to propose new modes of production for Shikka. So we try to also bring in this aspect of tourism that already exists at the coast of Shikka, bring it in with a remediated, renaturalized landscape. So the students actually worked again at multiple scales of intervention, moving from the really macro region scale of the entire Kaza of Shikka all the way down to certain coastal areas, and really looking at it layer by layer, moving all the way towards a project that comes down to the scale of the landscape and the public space and the intervention happening even in this case at one of the river streams that are there in the area. And again, incorporating leisure, incorporating tourism, and incorporating productive landscapes. And finally, actually, what I was saying in the beginning, that in my elective, which is really focused on the micro scale, it's not as micro as Rana's installations, I would say, but just this thinking that, we can use first architecture research as a medium to research on infrastructural issues in the country and use visualization as a tool for bringing forth and to the surface important infrastructural issues, highlighting problematics of, for example, transportation or energy or water in Lebanon. And then through the work, try to propose alternatives for these systems. So instead of thinking of infrastructure always as a mega scale, as a large dam or a large power plant in order to support and solve needed systems, why can't we think about it actually at the much more small or micro scale through multitudes, so through a network of distributed systems rather than singular systems. So this is what the students do in that class. They do a lot of research each year on a different theme. This one, for example, is about water. And in each of their proposals, they try to bring the problem of a specific context, in this case, the Litani River and its pollution, towards micro installations that can start to bring in an interesting solution, and where the visuals actually and the mapping becomes a method to advocate for these solutions and for that system. So this is another example actually showing energy systems that can be plugins on roofs of building across the city, where domestic waste can be used to kind of generate your own electricity in a continuous mode.
I mean, I think these are very empowering in a sense that it kind of gives us this sort of feeling that as design students, architecture students, imagine or think of interventions that at any scale, right? When I look at both things that you shared with me. So maybe then, Carla, if you want to see some positive light in all this, like, I mean, beyond this confine of the design school or the universities or architecture design departments, about critical practices, emerging bottom-up critical practices, I'm curious to hear what those would be in Lebanon in particular, if they're addressing similar issues that you're talking about now, or in our critical understanding of our environment, what can we do about it? And then I'll later ask the same question to Rana in terms of design activism and how can we do it today. But I think you mentioned briefly in the beginning about, or maybe you didn't, I'm not sure, this Shifting Grounds, your collaborative research project exhibited in the Venice 2021 biennial. And that there is a kind of critical understanding proposed about the urban scapes of Beirut. So would you like to respond to this very long and mixed up question about things, especially about from the points of view, if we can see any positive lights, against all these issues we're talking about, and from within, any lights in the end of the tunnel in terms of, how can we deal with this?
No, unfortunately, unfortunately, no. But though, we've reached a very, I would say, a bad state in Lebanon. It's very hard. And even now, of course, with everything happening in the world, it's very hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But at the same time, we can use these moments as opportunities actually to not just reflect, but to kind of do something, to bring forth a different type of thinking in hopes that in better times ahead, that some of these can be acted upon and achieved. And actually, this kind of, let's say, feeling of the architect or the designer that they need to do more and contribute more has been the case for a while in Lebanon. And I think it's because of the fact that for many years it wasn't really possible to create a lot of change. This change was not really happening top down from a government structure. So many times there has been moments in recent history where architects, urbanists, and designers felt the need to actually make the change themselves, to contribute to changing the local discourse, to put on the hat of the activist and try to create change. We've seen this in many forms and in many cases throughout. We've seen new investigative researchers coming about, researching different issues in Lebanon and trying to use this research towards policymaking. We've seen designers turned into hardcore activists, stopping projects that were going to be detrimental to the local environment or to public space in general. We've also seen many designers similar to us, what we have tried to do with the Beirut Shifting Grounds, really try to use global platforms and important venues in architecture as an opportunity to highlight certain issues about the country, and that might be also very important lessons for the world, not just for us in Lebanon specifically. So accordingly, really, we saw the Beirut Shifting Grounds invitation of participation, which was in the 2021 Venice Architecture Biennale and exhibited in its co-habitat section. We really saw it as an opportunity to highlight important issues about Beirut specifically in light of its a crisis, to see how, for example, and we focused on the issue of the urban ground and the ground space of Beirut, to have it reflect actually this continuous turmoil and transformation that the city was living. The project, of course, was carried out by a team of collaborators led by Sandra Frem and Boulos Douaihe from Plateau. And
Carla, was this before the blast when you designed this together or worked on it? Is it before, right?
No, not before. No, not before.
Not before, after. Okay.
We started, actually, the Biennale was planned to happen in 2020, but then it got, of course, postponed till 2021 because of COVID. And throughout that year, we started actually working on the project in December 2019. We were supposed to finish it by 2020, and then COVID, and then later the blast. So really, it was a full year of turmoil for us, where the very subject that we're trying to map and research and understand was in itself shifting. Hence, we reframed completely at one point how we were approaching this. It was supposed to be architecture of the public ground. It became Beirut Shifting Grounds. And it actually focused much more later on this continuous transformation and on actually activism and grassroots society's role in reshaping the ground post-blast and post-COVID and post the revolution of 2019. And the work actually tried to tackle this from four lenses: from the urban lens, looking at many neighborhoods across Beirut, and really like dissecting the ground level. This was carried out by Sandra Frem. The architecture scale, zooming in on key landmark buildings and how they, throughout the ages and through history actually, how their typology had, let's say, affected the way that the ground space or the urban space of the city was used. And this was led by Nicola Fayyad and Boulos Douaihe. The temporal lens, which I focused on, was related to Martyr Square specifically, this central node in the city and its transformation through time, always having a symbolic value for people. And then the human scale, led by Rana Haddad and in collaboration with Joanne Hayek, focused on the human scale and activism and grassroots societies' role actually in reshaping ground in crisis. And so the work, I mean, this is a picture of the installation. The work really was about bringing all of these different lenses and investigations together. It went through, as I said, a lot of constant transformations. And ultimately, we were able to finish and present the work on time. And then just maybe to highlight something that I personally tried to focus on through Martyr Square, which is to bring forth the importance of the issue of the erasure of memory. With Martyr Square, the space was completely destroyed after the Civil War, and specifically after the reconstruction process. And so the space that we have now is only functioning as a road junction. But what was important for me is not only, to understand this transformation of the square from the 1840s to today, but to also restructure this lost memory as an important not only as an important node, but as an important common ground that has always had value for people, was always able to bring people together, and was always able to be reinterpreted as a meaningful space for the people. So the mapping was really focused so much on 3D simulation, but it was also about highlighting this shift of the square from its 1840s mode of an open, free space. People were using it and adapting it based on their needs as a trade route, all the way to becoming a central and cultural and economic hub of the city, moving on to becoming, unfortunately, during the war, as a line of division and conflict, all the way till now as yet another open space, functioning as a road junction, yet still symbolically having value for the people to reclaim it and reinterpret it as they did in October 2019, turning it back to become a common ground. And I think that notion is extremely important, especially today, you know, with what happened in the Beyrut blast and the recent decision of the government to demolish the silos of the port. It's more important today than ever to stress on the notion of retaining our memory and not continuously erasing it and erasing with it all the crimes that happened. We should not forget anymore. And I think this is, it's an important point that I really wanted to make.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'll follow up with Rana and her contribution to the same project, but also, Rana, I mean, if you think of beyond, again, the confines or I wouldn't say confines, but the bounds of the university or the context of the university, when you think of your own practice, because they're very politically oriented and they address issues that we've been discussing here. So how can we pursue activism by design today, based on your experience, your practice? I mean, how can we gear our practices toward the reappropriation of public spaces, and how can we reclaim the ones that are lost, as Carla was talking about? And what is the role of the designer in all this, right? And if I want to relate your answer to the shifting grounds, that would be also much appreciated. Yeah.
Okay. First, I think I need to. Could you?
Sharing, unsharing.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. No, I was just making sure that I'm unmuted. Okay, yes. So wearing, you were saying at the beginning that we wear different hats. I think we are in a time where we shouldn't really anymore say that person is an artist, that person is an architect, because I think it's, like I said, it's a mindset. It depends on what we want to do or how we want to pursue our contribution, especially when you are living in a city like Beirut and in a country like, as Lebanon. So just to have a kind of a support to why public installations are very contextual and what they can trigger in people. In 2018, there was a call for to present for a portmanteau contribution for a call for an installation, and I discovered that. So I did it along with my colleague Pascal Hashim, and we discovered that portmanteau is not what the French means as portmanteau, but it is a luggage. So we decided, instead of redesigning the luggage to take what the luggage takes usually, we decided that the luggage should be taking us. So we should be in a luggage. And that happened because we felt that we are in a place where, once again, we would be where everything would be taken out from us. So the only thing that will be left of us is our own body. And even our face does not have a sense. So we decided to really push that installation to a point where we had ourselves in a luggage, and we've put our limbs and all of only our limbs out of our body. And when we were in Milwaukee Museum, so just to say, we had the 326 entries, and they only chose 7, and we were one of the 7. So by just being in a luggage and having to push yourself backward because you cannot move forward. So you are blind, you don't know where you're going, and you are actually in a very uncomfortable position, trying to make your way. So the whole setting in itself and the movement in itself and the struggle in itself tells the story of what we are living in our everyday life. So you don't need to even explain it. People were able to pick up on it. And the other thing is that the other thing that we discovered is that actually it wasn't us that were uncomfortable, it was the public that was uncomfortable. And there was two settings and the two contexts were totally different, because when we were in a museum, you know, you are in a white cube, so the public is totally different than if you go to the riverbed, which is in Beirut, and you're gonna see it now. So people were actually wondering if it was real. So they wouldn't talk to us because they couldn't see a face to us, but we were moving and we were pushing them around because we couldn't see them. So they had to push away from us, but none held us or none tried to push us while they could have. And at the same time, no one tried to speak to us as long as we're in the luggage. They actually came and pinched us to see if they were real. So this is, again, another contextual situation where people are intrigued by what you're doing and are trying to say why they are not at ease. And this is where afterwards the conversation was amazing when we were in Milwaukee. Having said that, the opposite, not really the opposite as much as what was happening on the corniche, is that, again, people were looking at us, but at the same time trying to ignore the situation. So there is always a sense of humor to what we do, but usually the message is quite heavy, if I may say. And an installation is never about this moment only that it's taking place, is all the narrative that it carries on. So being it while you're making it, being it afterwards, or being it during the installation itself. So if I may say, we were archiving ourselves because we only had ourselves to put in that luggage. And to continue on this, when in 2018, the Lebanese decided to revote for the same people that unfortunately made us in where we stand now, I've put myself in a window and I was applauding the people on the streets for what they did. And that was on the wall. So, so of course, a lot of people hated my guts, and I had some people that waited for me that because they really wanted to pinch me or to actually box me in the face, because they were so annoyed they felt that I was insulting about by putting all these words on the wall. But again, the trigger of the conversation about it, and once again, I was in the vitrine and I didn't have the key. So I couldn't take myself out. I had to wait for someone to bring me out. And I was having an eye contact, direct eye contact with the people. And this is how I was able to get their attention. So as long as they keep the eye contact, I applaud them. When they let go, I don't applaud them anymore. So that was a very political stand that I took in this window. And I was doing that for a full week on the streets. And I had someone from the public asking me if they can take my role, and I allowed them to do so. And even some of the students that wanted to participate, and then they came and they were part of it too. And that was a trigger. And I realized that, again, this is why I'm saying all performance or installation is very contextual. In 2018, when we start losing our city to more privatizations and to a more so-called need of security with all this neoliberalism that we had to inherit from Solidaire, unfortunately, that spread all along in the city, we've decided with the student that we have to come up with a set of performances that are tackling all the informalities that happen in the city, and at the same time addressing factual things that were happening to the locals. So if you go to Mar Mikhael, the parking lots are always taken usually by the valet parking, so they can park the cars of the people that are coming to the coffee places or to the bars. And what we did is that we sat on the plastic chair that they used to block the parking, and we had on our hands the tickets with the timing of the parking. So we paid for our place to stay on this parking lot. And of course, when the valet parking came to push us away, we wouldn't budge. And what happened is that the people were looking at us from the balcony, they joined us and they were asking us, why are you doing that? And we said, because this is our right and you should be able to park your cars. And they were so happy that they start pushing themselves the valet parking to find their places again. So they realized that that valet parking had no take on that street as long as there was a parking lot that they could pay for. So this is where the city dwellers stood by the student claiming their rights when valet parking came to push them away. And it was a way of giving a voice for the people in a very subtle, simple interference. While for Beirut, shifting ground, I think Carla said it all, but at the same time, because I'm talking about the contextual and how it was very important for us because we had this very difficult year and we had we couldn't see that the ground was shifting and for us not to react to all this. So in the human lens, I chose to address it by doing 4 different movies. And these movies were about the abundance of the city and the richness of it and how you pose in the city. And at the same time about the grassroots. And this is where Joanne was collaborating. We collaborated with Joanne to mark all these NGOs and these private initiatives to save the city after the blast. But at the same time, the hardest thing that I wanted to share with the public is the blast itself. And this is where my question was, how can you share the blast without showing the blast? And how can you share how difficult that was for us to live through it? So I had to reinvent the whole setting of an understanding of installation being a digital, between putting the relationship between the words and the making. So this is only the making of, it's not even the final result, but just to say that it was very important to show how 28 seconds was able to ruin 1/3 of a city. And that this will mark us forever. And I think that we are all scarred by it. And our city is not the same and it will never be the same again. We just have to find another way to reinvent our city after we've lost all that we've lost, because we didn't lose the materiality, we lost the practice, we lost the soul, and we lost what made us because it was defining us. So I think that, I hope that I answered your question, Kıvanç.
Yes, yeah, you definitely did, and thank you for sharing your work as well. You answered more. In fact, I was going to ask both of you how, with all these things, right? It's been in this really difficult regions, to say the least, surrounded by conflict. I mean, we're all, but especially Lebanon, when you think of the civil war, it's kind of traces memories embedded in the urban psyche, in people's memories, but also in the city itself. Still visible in some of the, I would call them monuments, perhaps without them wanting to be, but or the more recent mass protests and revolts, the Thawra, and what happened afterwards, and the terrible blast you just talked about a few years ago, which gave a huge damage to the city, physical infrastructure, but also emotionally to the people, and as well as taking lives and wounding people, of course. But at the same time, as I was told the same thing when I worked there, when I lived there, Beirutis, Lebanese are being resilient, have been resilient, they push back, they come from the, sort of ashes, metaphorically speaking, and bounce back and reclaim or keep living, whatever the circumstances, or the city's cosmopolitanism, its liberal aura compared to the other countries around it. So, this is quite complex, no? When you think of your, as professionals, as teachers, and as professors in the university. So how do all these things inform you, and especially on your research as well? You talked about practice and your course curricula, when you design them. Is it something that you reflect on all the time, or is it something inevitably into the lives of the things you're doing? You answered partly my question anyways, but I'd like to also ask this question to Carla, and I'm curious how she would react, and also to Rana, to you, if you want to follow up.
No, yeah. I can stop sharing. Please go ahead, Carla.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't have a slide specifically for this question, but but just to say, yes, of course, the memories of the civil war are, with us till today, partly because of there was never a real reconciliation process. There was never a real, recognition of what happened and how this has affected so much, not just our cities, but our life and the way that people live together. So unfortunately, because of that, we find that the issue of the war is very much still alive. But it's also a generational thing. I think people in my generation and younger, of course, tend to reflect less on the war than people of a slightly older generation who were in their prime years and their, let's say, late teenage years all the way to their early 20s, living through the war and actually affecting a lot their lives in a much more, I think, major manner. And you see it reflected in local artists and filmmakers, architects, designers of that generation. Till this day, they continue to reflect on the scars of the war in their work. Personally, actually, one of the main things that I felt was important to look at was specifically Martyrs Square. I was always quite, affected directly or indirectly by the fact that there was a space in the city that my parents and people of their generation really had a connection to, and that Beirut to them was something completely different. And we've completely lost that symbol and that face of the city as it was. I always found this issue quite, what's the word? Not just emotional, I would say, but quite, it's strongly affecting the way I look at Beirut. I always imagine that I can't believe that this, road junction used to be the life and the place of the city, used to have buildings all around it and a landscape and a transportation hub and etc. So through the work specifically of Beirut Shifting Grounds, and actually this came, the research on Martyrs Square came also from an earlier research I had done in my own graduate studies also on the square. It was always about recapturing what was lost, trying to rebuild it and understand it as a space that can be lived again, but also to see it in light of how it is still being lived today, whether directly or indirectly. So for me, this relationship to the war is very much related to the issue of the lost memory, I have to say. And this is something that comes recurringly back.
Thank you. Rana, do you have anything to add, or
yes, yes,
okay.
if we have the time, yes.
Yes,
actually,
we have a few more minutes.
Actually, a lot
Definitely.
to add, because Carla pinpointed the most important thing, which is the memory loss. And one of the triggers of the war and the public installation, because what I did not mention is that it's in their temporality. So the memory loss is very important. And mostly when I started after the war, is started with this specifically. So Carla was talking about this Place de Martyrs and how it was alive. It was alive by places like Farou, Zahra, Automatique, Cosmos, Parisiana, Haj Daoud, Rivoli, Gendarme, all of these names that used to make the center, and we don't have anymore. And because when I started, when I came back, and actually it was even my research for my master's at the AA, is that how can we still use these names to reconciliate the youth with Beirut that is a total tabula rasa still, and they had nothing to hold on to because the landmarks that would trigger stories for their parents to tell their stories were no more. So a simple exercise that I did in 1997 was to give to these students these names randomly. So I put it in a jar, I mixed it, and I let them each one just pick a word. And they had that word, and I'm like, what is it? And I said, well, I have no clue, go ask. And they said, what do you mean, go ask? And I said, well, you can start with your parents. And this is where it was amazing, because the best team of the best friends became enemy, because suddenly their parents had the word. So, and it was the word Cosmos versus the word Automatique. So each one of the parent was saying, I was during the war one of the militant, and we pushed the line. And she had a friend from her other side saying, no, my dad said that he pushed the line in the other direction. So suddenly they inherit the fight of their parents. And for a while, they hated each other's guts. By the time they discovered, and we were able through the pedagogy of this workshop, to make them realize that their fights, the parents' fights is not theirs, and they should not inherit that. And they could restore the relationship with the ground that is Beirut now through these stories, but in their own ways. This is why we cannot afford to lose this. And this is why a total amnesia is the worst thing that happened to us. So, and from then on, I realized how it's important to have these public installations that are triggers of memory. And at the same time, they are always about, because they themselves disappear, they become yet another story that is implemented in the city. And I have so many examples, and we don't have time for that. And I don't want to drag the talk, but just very quickly, the other example that is about the Théâtre de Beirut, because Théâtre de Beirut was one of these landmarks that we've lost because the authority decided to close it. And by closing the Théâtre de Beirut, actually they canceled all the socio-political theater events that took place in this on this platform during the Civil War. And for that, we did an installation. We cut the chair in two in the window, and we had quite a big public, and we were able to give it 18 months span of their life. But at the same time, we were able to publish the book about it, and people were so aware of it. And at the same time, we had, this installation had an impact on the city. And had an impact on so many other research and PhD work that has been done. And at the same time on us, because we were followed by the authority and they wanted to put us in prison. So just to say that there is always, it's very complex to make an installation works in cities like ours, but at the same time, it's worth it. Yeah. So again, I think I should stop because otherwise I can be
I can talk to you forever, as you know, but let's make put a comma instead of a full stop, because we can now turn to our audience and who have been with us patiently for 1 hour right now. To receive their questions and comments. I have more questions, of course, but it's not me, but the audience rather than.
Of course, I will stop sharing.
Definitely, thank you. And I don't see anything in the chat box, but if any of our beloved audience would like to ask questions, just raise your hands and we'll be giving you the floor. I see here students from AUB. Ümit, our colleague from AUB, is there. Our friends from KHAS, my colleagues and students. So don't be shy, please. If you don't, I will. But it shouldn't be me. I think I've talked enough. Are there any questions?
If I may, Kıvanç.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah, I was waiting.
Very briefly, Carla, Kıvanç, Rana, thank you. It was a real pleasure. Really, I really enjoyed it from the beginning to the end. I have actually a very simple, straightforward question to both of you, Carla and Rana. You have been teaching for several years now, and this entire conversation often referred to the ways in which you yourself and your students related to the city and the larger, social, political, economic framework and the context that we all go through. So my question is basically, do you observe any kind of major change or transformation in the ways in which the students relate to the city? Basically, Rana, you said you have been teaching since 90s, for example. The question is basically about the generational sort of difference. Can we say that the students of the 90s saw and perceived their city in significantly different ways than the students of, let's say, late 2010s? So there are obviously different, ways in which students in general, think about their world in the age of social media and so on and so forth. But in the particular specific circumstances of Beirut and Lebanon, this is actually a question for both of you. I can imagine that Saura, the recent uprising in 2019, it was a watershed, yes, but even before that, maybe. Whatever way you want to take up from this question, I would really appreciate to hear your experiences.
Shall I, Carla?
Hey, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Umid, for your question. I think it is very relevant, actually, because it is the case. The students in the 90s had no city to fall onto because the center was not here. So somehow imagine that you are in front of a tabula rasa with the hearsay stories, but nothing to understand what the city was made of. And this is why the name of places was very important. So they didn't relate. They hated Beirut. Basically, I kept on hearing them saying that they hated Beirut, that they'd rather be in Paris, Berlin, London, wherever, but Beirut for them, it's not a city. Because what the war did and what the government did is that by over-fragmenting the city, you couldn't feel its urbanity anymore. The only real urban place that we can still claim urban is probably Burj Hamoud for what it stands now, and Hamra to a certain extent when AUB start prospering again. But so they couldn't really even understand what urbanity means because they were hidden by their parents, they were cocooned, and so they didn't have a relation to it. 2000 and onwards, the student had started to see that there is a lot to be done. Like Carla was saying, we had a lot of NGOs and artists doing activism work, and there's a certain awareness for the need of reclaiming citizens' rights and citizens' civic rights. So the students start to want to be part of it. And we've seen a lot of our own students shifting from architecture to do such work. So yes, a much bigger change. And I think that this change is what we are seeing now on the floor with all the NGOs that suddenly start to happen again, because we have no government, and it was through them and through all these initiatives that the city was saved. And there is part of the resilience of the Lebanese, like Kıvanç was asking us. I remember very well, after the 19th of October, the next day we found ourselves, without even calling each other, at 6 in the morning, sweeping out the floor of the Martyr Square, because we didn't want to give that image of the city being dirty again. And then suddenly we realized that something is happening. So people picked up on it, and there was an NGO taking that into consideration. And the same NGO grew into recycling and grew into awareness of so many things. And then some kitchens start to pop up. So this is our resilience. But at the same time, our resilience is working against us, because we are like this. There's people keep on seeing us accommodating, and we are still doing it. Like, if I wasn't doing it, I wouldn't have been now able to be connecting with Kıvanç, because I wouldn't have electricity. But I'm paying my generator so I can function again. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of Ümit, but to me, yes. I got too excited. Carla, do you have a response as well?
Yeah, actually, I mean, from my end, it's a bit of a different perspective, in the sense that I started teaching also much later than Rana. I started teaching actually right after I came back from graduate studies around 2007 in Lebanon. And, you know, Lebanon went through different, you know, turmoil periods. We had the 15-year civil war, then 15 years of somewhat rest, but still under foreign occupation. And then 2005, of course, the assassination of Prime Minister Hariri, and a lot of like shifts, political, but also social, a lot of unrest, continuous, you know, explosions happening. So the situation was actually very precarious. And I returned around that time to teach. And at that time, really, there was this feeling of, you know, that students were kind of in a funk. What's the word? Like, I felt that there was really like a very negative energy at the time, much less inspired than usual in the discipline. It felt more stagnant. Of course, I might be generalizing. There was always, you know, some students who go beyond the circumstance, but as a general mood, unfortunately, it was quite low in the production of students. And that shifted in the years that came after that. We witnessed a period of relative, progress. And a key example was a lot of our colleagues, or even students who graduated early on that we knew, were coming back also to Lebanon from their graduate studies, coming back to contribute. So there was this energy happening, and you felt there was progress somehow in the development of teaching, our curricula, and the bringing, forth of labs and whatnot in teaching and in academia. And, you know, with these recent shifts, of course, a lot of students were involved, whether in the revolution or in activist group. So the energy was still somewhat there. But despite now us hitting rock bottom, and, you know, many of us losing hope in what comes next, but somehow I still find that students still have the energy actually to work and to be inspired. And I think it's really because of globalization, the relationship of their work to what's happening outside, the connectivity, and, post-COVID, the ability actually to converse with a large global network and really being part of it. So you feel students are actually engaged and almost using it as a way to get out of the country, you know, like doing their best because they know after graduation they have a key out. So this is, like, in a nutshell, kind of my sentiment of this shifts, at least since 2005 till today, what we are living.
Thank you, Carla. Any other questions, or any final question rather? I think we pushed the limits of our given time. But Betül, I think you'll have. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
First of all, Rana and Carla, thank you very much. Your work is very inspiring. So you talked about the exercises, the projects that you assigned on integrating nature and highlighting sustainability. but animals, non-humans, especially wild animals, I mean, we see in the news time to time, especially for Istanbul, a wild animal is seen here and there. So they're trying to adapt the urban environments. And, but still cities are very much imagined as this purified spaces for humans still, right? So how do designers need to engage with the non-humans? I mean, you mentioned about that, but do you want to expand on this issue in general?
Yeah, I mean, of course, when looking at natural environments, we are definitely, and we need to be looking at both the living, or let's say the non-humans, as you're saying, the flora and the fauna. So really looking at both ends of the spectrum and how, you know, that relates to human intervention. At the scale of the city, I mean, of course, it's extremely important that in the way that we're designing, that we do address the notions of the ecosystems, whether it is, you know, the birds' migratory routes, making sure that there's a continuity there, whether it is the effect of the urban environment on marine ecology, which is, I mean, extremely important in Lebanon, and as the impact between the urban context and the coast is extremely harsh and severe and detrimental. Actually, we're losing a lot of our very particular ecosystems because of that. So definitely, I mean, this needs to be part of the question. And in addressing somehow new design approaches, there has to be a consideration for both. In several projects that we did in this new design, or the idea of a new ecology, the approach was to support the possibility for the natural environment at large, for both the flora and the fauna, to sustain in a more holistic manner. So some of the projects I showed, for example, in the Shika neighborhood, dealt also very strongly with, in addition to renaturalizing the landscape post the cement production, to try to bring back the bird migratory routes through enhancements of the local ecology. The same for the coastal areas, and looking at what's the term? Not oysters, but the similar sea urchin. Actually, ecosystems at the coast also helped through using architecture as a way to create wave barriers and pollution barriers in order to help sea urchin ecosystems grow back again. So there's definitely that level, but I think your question of really bringing that much more into the urban environment can be definitely pushed much further.
Thank you, Carla. Betül, do you have a follow-up, or you?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rana, would you like to add a few words, or should we?
No, it's okay. I mean, I just wanted to say that we do have this awareness in the department, and we do encourage our students to do that. And one of our vertical, we basically decided to tackle specifically the relationship with all the ecology, and not only the animals, we even tackled the insects. So yes, with the climate change, this is a topic that we need to definitely address, and to always be able to contextualize our work in relation to what is happening, if it is locally or globally. So yes, we do that, and we need to do more of it for sure.
Okay, thank you very much for Betül, for Ümit, for their questions. And Rana and Carla, I really very much appreciate you being here. I miss you a lot. Needless to say, the millionth time I'm saying this, but you know, it's my true feelings, and it has been a pleasure to be talking to you here on these issues. And thank you to our audience for staying with us. I guess this is the end of it, right? Dila Hocam, we'll just say, because I think it's 8:25, we need to conclude our conversation.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kıvanç, for having us.
Thank you.
For KHAS for hosting us as well. It was really a pleasure to talk together on this.
Thanks a lot again. It was wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.